The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has ruled that indeed President Donald Trump can send National Guard troops into Portland. And the court, so it was a 3-judge panel on the court, will probably get sent to the full Ninth Circuit for a review. But it relied on precedent in basically saying that the federal government has the power and a uncontested interest in the protection of federal agents and property and the faithful execution of law. So basically what they said is, if the president needs to protect federal agents and federal assets, then he has the authority vested in him by Congress, really, to be able to do that. And so they made that ruling. And of course, there was an immediate meltdown from leaders in Portland and here in Washington state, which we'll get to in a moment. But Attorney General Pam Bondi commenting on this, saying today the Ninth Circuit found that POTUS has the right to deploy the National Guard to Portland, Oregon, where local leaders have failed to keep their citizens safe. This follows hard work by the Justice Department attorneys and helps reaffirm a simple truth. President Trump is the commander-in-chief. We will continue fighting and winning in court to defend President Trump's agenda. Now, how quickly President Donald Trump might activate the National Guard to send them to the ICE facility in Portland isn't clear. I was speaking to some sources today, and there really isn't a set timeline. The National Guard troops, they were getting ready for a deployment when this court order halted it, and so it certainly would take probably a couple days to get them back up and out to so maybe this weekend, I guess, is what they might be aiming for. But the meltdown over this, look, and I have my disagreements with it, which I'll discuss in a moment because I have certainly a nuanced perspective on this. But I got to play this from Congresswoman Maxine Dexter, Democratic Congresswoman representing the area of the state that includes Portland. Here's what she said.
Maxine Dexter, Oregon's 3rd, checking in after what I would say is an indefensible ruling by the Ninth Circuit that opens the door to National Guard troops being deployed in our peaceful city. Let's just be clear. Portland is not lawless. We have been extraordinary in our resistance to Donald Trump's fairy tale about our city. We have remained peaceful, persistent, and clear that we do not bend the knee to Donald Trump and his wannabe kingmanship. And we will continue to be so. This ruling must be challenged, and we must remain steadfast in our peaceful resistance to Donald Trump, the tyranny he is trying to take onto our cities and across this country, and what I would say is an extraordinarily dangerous precedent by militarizing our city and moving towards a dictatorship.
Okay, so you can disagree with the deployment of the National Guard, but half of what she said there is just a lie. It's just a lie. And her whole assertion, we're not going to bend the knee to Donald Trump. No, you bend the knee to far left anarchists and to Antifa and to people who perpetrate acts of political violence in pursuit of your ideology. That's who you bend the knee to. It's very clear. But a couple of the things she said there, it's just demonstrably false. The idea that Portland is peaceful. It's not peaceful. That's absolutely ridiculous. And you can say, hey, there's a problem outside the ICE facility. It's been going on for like 4.5 months, and it's an unacceptable situation. But, outside that, there isn't some sort of widespread emergency that we need the federal government to respond to. Like, use some nuance. But that shows how little she thinks of her constituents, that she would say that that's peaceful. That's just ridiculous. And then to her claim that Portland's not lawless, agree to disagree. As I said, when I went down to Portland, absent this situation outside the ICE facility, which is 2 miles from downtown, the real war zone and lawlessness in Portland is downtown Portland. Now, I think a lot of people could make a compelling argument that you absolutely need help from the feds in downtown Portland. It is a cesspool. It is, totally devoid of any, productive human atmosphere. I mean, it's like a ghost town. And so there's these two separate issues here. I am so sick of Portland leaders and Oregon leaders claiming that their city's doing just fine. That's just not true. It's just not true. The homeless crisis, the crime crisis, the drug crisis, you have blocks and blocks and blocks of boarded up storefronts in downtown Portland. It is far worse there than Seattle. And you know how I feel about the situation in downtown Seattle. Downtown Portland needs all the help it can get. They should be begging the federal government to send extra FBI agents, extra DEA agents, extra ATF agents, and any assistance whatsoever to try to get downtown Portland back on its feet. So I just can't take anyone seriously, even if, let's say, even if Oregon and Democrats had some reasonable arguments to be made about the deployment of National Guard troops. Like, I'd totally be willing to have that conversation and entertain some of that. But when you have people who say it's not lawless and it's peaceful in Oregon, then automatically I'm going to dismiss every other thing they say after that, because they're just liars. They're absolute liars, and they think so little of their constituency. So before I get to Seattle Mayor Bruce Harrell's immediate response to what's happening in Portland, as I've said many times on this show, and I hope you're listening, Seattle Times, because you frequently mischaracterize my opinions and don't actually watch my show, and you've mischaracterized my opinion on this. I do not support National Guard deployment in a broader law enforcement capacity, period. I don't, because I think it's a slippery slope, and I don't want a Democratic president deploying the National Guard to, help boys play in girls' sports and go into girls' dress. I mean, all sorts of nonsense stuff that they would do with that. So I do think there has to be a line there. Now, that being said, as I've also said many times, the federal government, and as the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which isn't exactly known for being pro-Trump, as they say here, the president has the right, the power, and a very clear interest in protecting federal agents and assets. So if that's the role the National Guard goes to Portland and plays, and it's very narrow in scope, it's very specific, I don't know how anyone can argue that that's not lawful. The issue I have is I don't know what the National Guard will do that these federal agents on the ground aren't already doing. I mean, you see them, they look like troops for all intents and purposes, and they're out there, they're making arrests, they're clearing the roadway. That's what I need from the federal government. What is the National Guard going to do in that area that these federal protective service agents aren't already doing? That's sort of where I don't understand what's going on there. So that's some information that we'll try to understand by reaching out to the Department of Justice and to the Trump administration. What exactly is the role, is the mission, etc. So all of this is going on. And meanwhile, Seattle Mayor Bruce Harrell, who's in the fight of his life for re-election, is just desperate to distract from his failures and the failures of the city and to try to appeal as much as he can to the far left. So it was like immediate. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals came out with this ruling, and he immediately released a video. Here's part of it.
Well, we read the panel of the Ninth Circuit's ruling down in Portland, and so we studied that decision to see the implications here for in Seattle. And so we, of course, are encouraging them in Portland to appeal it to the full Ninth Circuit. And in following the law, which we think is really bad policy, and so we're hopeful an appeal will result in a better ruling, common sense would dictate that Trump is overreaching. It's not only mean-spirited, but we believe inconsistent with the values here and inconsistent with the 10th Amendment of the Constitution. So we will fight this tyrannical approach, this federal overreach. We are prepared and we are vocal in our stance on protecting the values here in Seattle against Trump.
Protecting your values. That always bothers me whenever anyone, I don't care who it is, any politician talks about our values. Not everyone shares your freaking values, and not everyone thinks it's mean-spirited to enforce lawful immigration efforts. And that's the thing I always go back to is, why are you mad at Donald Trump when he's enforcing a law that is on the books about people not being able to come to our country illegally? It's because they don't want to come out and say, because it would sound much worse if they came out and said, we don't want there to be borders and people should be able to come here whenever they choose, however they choose, because that just sounds stupid. And then they just blame Trump, and then people buy into that, and they think, oh, that's an easy person to blame, and it doesn't sound as just absolute fringe lunatic. And he says it's mean-spirited. Okay, so enforcing the law is mean-spirited? This is just Bruce Harrell's desperate attempt to try to score points with the far left because he's running against a socialist. Didn't perform well in the primary. Election is weeks away. He genuinely, I believe this, he wants Donald Trump here. He needs that. He absolutely wants Donald Trump to deploy the National Guard to Seattle so that he can stand up and be the guy, the champion against the bad orange man. And it's really, there's nothing happening in Seattle. So again, put aside the very clear issues in Seattle with homelessness and drugs and crime, which, again, I was actually shocked how much worse things are in Portland than Seattle. I might have some hope for downtown Seattle after seeing downtown Portland. But, I'm not talking about bringing troops here, and I don't think the Trump administration is either, to deal with an issue not related to ICE, immigration, etc. So there's no widespread rioting. There's no situation in Seattle like in Portland. 4.5 months, is it June, July, August, September? Yeah, 4.5 months. This has been going on outside the ICE facility in Portland. So there really wouldn't be a reason. Bruce is just manufacturing because what? We're neighbors with Portland? Oh, we're neighbors with Portland. Our politics are the same, so we must be next. No, he's focused on Portland, but Bruce Harrell just has to insert himself because he sees this as maybe a way that he can prove that he's, really woke and in line with the socialists and all of this stuff. And then keep in mind, so we've got our fearless mayor, Bruce Harrell, who's orange man bad, orange man bad. And then we also have the law enforcement arm of the mayor's office, which has become the Seattle Police Department, and the Seattle police chief, who's also towing that line.
I will do everything in my power, I want to be clear, to protect anyone in Seattle from anyone who comes to this city with the intention to hurt them or inhibit their First Amendment rights. And what that means is, at some point, I will probably go to jail and be in prison, because we have an administration that has threatened to jail politicians and indeed has done so.
It's so embarrassing. And then he goes and he does an interview with the Seattle Times saying that ICE is making up that there's 1,000% increase in threats and assaults on ICE agents. He says that he thinks it's made up, which is really just a disgusting thing to say, especially when you consider that the far left anarchists and Antifa who are assaulting these ICE agents are the exact same people. Chief Sean Barnes, before you became the chief of police in Seattle, you might need a refresher on this, a little bit of history lesson, because obviously you don't know. Those are the exact same people who were assaulting your officers, who were assaulting the officers you're now responsible for in 2020, who were throwing bricks and rocks at them, who were throwing mortars, who tried to cement them into a police station and light it on fire. The exact same people who burned cop cars in the streets. The exact same people who wish death on your police officers, who scrawled ACAB, all cops are bastards, all over every single precinct in the city. The exact same people who scared 600 of your officers out of the city to go seek employment elsewhere. So you saying that, these attacks aren't happening on ICE agents, whether they'll tell it to you or not, is a slap in the face to every single member of the Seattle Police Department who went through the hate and the vitriol and the violence at the hands of those far left demonstrators for 4 months in Seattle in the summer of 2020. And before that, during all the May Day riots and the Occupy movement. So shame on you, sir. It's quite disgusting. Now, thankfully, I got endless texts after we talked last week on the show about these statements from Seattle Police Chief Sean Barnes. My phone just lit up with Seattle police sources. And I will say, I'm not going to name names, obviously, but up to and including the rank of captain that said, Brandi, we will respond to help ICE agents whose lives are in jeopardy, even if it means defying a direct order from the chief of police and even if it means sacrificing our careers. I got some version of that message from officers, from detectives, and up to and including a captain, from sergeants who said, regardless of what our woke police chief or the mayor say, we're not going to let ICE agents die and sit back and do nothing like they did in Chicago. So it's a crazy situation. Seattle mayor absolutely manufacturing a crisis that doesn't exist here. We'll see what the National Guard does in Portland. We're going to be reaching out for comment about the breadth of their mission there and what, if anything, they'll be doing differently than the agents that we see there night after night. And hey, maybe the agents just need a break. I can see that after 4.5 months. I can see that they are worn out. And maybe they just need a break, and the National Guard can come in and give them a break. But as long as they're confined to protecting federal agents and assets, that's lawful. Mayor Bruce Harrell brought up the 10th Amendment. So, of course, rights not specifically given to the federal government are left to the states. They say that the president isn't specifically given the right to deploy National Guard troops, and that's not true. And even the Ninth Circuit said that that's not true. And so I don't know. The mayor's not very smart, obviously, and he, because it's mean-spirited, thinks that laws shouldn't apply and court precedent shouldn't apply.